Have you ever wondered what it takes to have a tax efficient retirement strategy? What does it look like? If you were supposed to lay this out and really process this from start to finish, I think what it would look like is something like this. And I call it the six S's of the tax efficient retirement strategy. The first is setting a timeline. So the first thing you need to understand is how long will this individual need the money? And if there's a couple, then how long will each family member need this money over the retirement period, right? Of course, depending on how long they need the money, that's going to be super important. You're going to have some assumptions here based on how old you are, and also we're going to look at the life expectancy. But essentially, we will start off with setting the timeline for this time period. The next thing we look at is specific needs. We have to specify the needs and desires. And essentially, we're going to look at what is essential in terms of needs, what is essential in terms of lifestyle wants. Our needs and wants essentially are things that we absolutely need on a day to day: food, shelter, clothing, for lack of a better term. Then we look at lifestyle wants. What are lifestyle wants? Lifestyle wants essentially are things that you want, beyond just the everyday living things. So these are the travels, um, these are obviously the travels. These are the things that we want to spend on. Probably there's a fancy car that you always wanted. Maybe there are things that you always wanted to purchase. Maybe there are hobbies that are, a little bit more expensive. And it's not something you need, but it's something that you absolutely want to take part in because you have the time and the luxury to do so. So we want to separate those things. Why are we going to separate those things? Depending on how things play out in the long term, we absolutely need certain things. These are the essential needs. We're going to keep those. And the first things we're probably going to look to cut are the lifestyle wants, right? So we may need to limit those if we need to, right? So it gives us some buffering for planning. So first, we set the timeline. Next, we specify the needs and wants. The next S is survey assets, savings, and setbacks. When I say setbacks, we're talking about liabilities. So you have to know your assets and your debts. So you might say, okay, we're planning a future. What is the debts? How does debts play into this? Debts plays a lot into this because it's going to limit how much cash flow we get from the different assets. Not only that, if we have bad debt, we may want to convert that into something that's a good debt. Essentially, if we have bad debt, it's debt that we can't write off, and it's usually tied to some type of depreciable asset. And if somewhere we could convert that over into a debt where we can deduct this debt, and so we can convert it into some type of debt where it allows us to lower income if it's deductible, then that's something we want to look at. And also, if we have debt where we have, again, consumer related stuff versus debt that's, something has to do with investment, that's potentially something we could do. It's called a debt swap, right? Turn bad debt into good debt. And then we are going to look at all the assets and savings. Where are we looking at assets? We're going to look at assets for us to understand what's the potential in terms of how much do we have that we could actually spend. No, once we have that all laid out, then we focus on how much net income we could get from each individual asset. And we want to look because essentially we're at the point where when we get to retirement, we want to have these choices. And by the way, this is the challenge with retirement. The challenge with retirement is you go from having one source of income to know your retirement and you have multiple sources of income: RSP, TFSAs, government pensions, private pensions, you know, all these different sources, non-registered, regular stocks. You probably have some GICs, a range of different things, right? So we want to lay these out and see, you know, what's the net income potential of each of these things. Also, next thing we're going to look at is subtract tax impact. Now we have all these different assets, but they're going to be taxed differently. And as we know, you could be taxed in three ways: income, capital gains, dividends, and we're also tax free. So I should probably throw that in there. And so we want to look at all these different assets, look at all these cash flow, look at all these streams of income and see how they're going to be taxed. Why? Because it's not how much you actually have coming to you in terms of cash flow, it's how much you're actually paying. It's going to be a huge factor, especially when we think about things like OAS clawbacks and things of that nature. So let's review what we have so far. We have set the timeline. This is how long we need this money for, specify needs and desires, how much we actually want, survey assets, savings, and setbacks. So what we want to look at all the different assets we have and all the different debt and see how best we could structure that. Again, if we have bad debt, want to convert that to good debt. They want to see net income potential. So we're going to focus then on each of these assets and see what potentially each asset can generate for us. If government pensions, we know it's a fixed amount. If it's a non-registered, we have some flexibility there, but depending on how much we want to take, we will have to decide, right? RSPs, same, have a certain amount of RSPs, but then, it depends. We're going to have tax ramifications, which brings us to the next one, which is subtract the tax impact. We look at all the different assets and see which is the best way to do it. And each year, we have to look at that. And that's the thing with decumulation. It's not a set it and forget it type thing because things change. One person could, get a huge inheritance. We could find out that there are illnesses. We could find out that there are emergencies with the families. And this kind of changes things from year to year. So each year we want to look and see what's the most tax efficient way that we could pull these assets based on the situation. Next, we want to do is sustain income and safeguard capital. So once we've decided how much we have coming, what we want to do is, okay, we also want to play the long game. We're not just playing it annually each year, but we also have to look at these assets and see what's the best way to balance the income withdrawals. That way we don't deplete these assets before it's too soon, which, by the way, is often the biggest concern that retirees have, is that they're going to run out of money. Do I have enough? What if I live to be 85? What if I live to be 90? What if I live to be 100? What if I want to set the world record and live to be 140, which I'm not sure if that's the world record, but you know, um, what ifs. And so what you want to do is structure the plan while we're taking income, also safeguard for capitals. No, what's the best way to address this? I think a stress test is always great. And stress tests that you usually want to put forward is one. You want to see what happens if the stock market crashes. 30, 40%, your whole thing tanks. How does your portfolio sustain after all of that? Next thing, you also want to test for inflation. Have a higher inflation rate, and that's going to affect, of course, the money that you're pulling out. Years ago when I talked about inflation, people kind of poo-pooed it because they figured inflation never had that problem. I think no, we're conscious of inflation as we speak right now. Inflation is going down, but in the recent years, it has been some concern. So we want to deal with that effectively, right? And then we also want to throw longevity in. What if I live 10 years, 20 years past life expectancy? Because I'm doing well now and I plan to continue doing well. Will I run out of money at that point? So this is where we stress test the plan. We see if we sustain the income and safeguard the capital. And if there's a shortfall, we look at plan Bs and Cs and Ds, if possible, to see what's the best way that we can structure this plan. So tax efficient retirement strategy. This is really the framework. We start off by setting a timeline. How long are we going to need these funds for? We specify the needs and desires, right? What you essentially need. Lifestyle wants. The lifestyle wants are the trips and the gifting and all that fun stuff, right? Because if we have some shortfalls, we may want to consider cutting back on that, or even if we have enough, we may want to keep that just in case and probably give that upon death. The next S is survey asset savings and setbacks. Look at assets, see how much they can generate. Look at the savings, see what you have. Setbacks, we look at liabilities and see how that could take away from the assets. We convert good debt to bad debt, eliminate debt if we need to. But we know that that's going to affect our cash flow. Our next one is see net income potential. Look at all the different assets. How much can we get from each assets? And then we subtract tax impact. What's that? We look at the different assets and see how they're taxed individually, because that's going to allow us to be strategic in how we withdraw these funds. And lastly, we sustain income and safeguard capital. We want to make sure that we have continuous cash flow, but at the same time, protect capital, right? So cash flow is one thing, but we want to make sure the capital is continuous. This is what I call the 6 S's tax efficient retirement strategy that I work with clients. I know it's not the simplest thing, but a lot of times people want to know how you process this, how you go about it. It's going to look something like this. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me, and I will answer as many questions as possible. Take care and have a good day, and I'll catch you next week.